They don't understand why you're still in their head. There's no active conversation, no recent connection, no reason that should keep bringing you back into their thoughts. And yet, you show up at random moments, in silence, without effort, not because you're trying to be remembered, but because something about you didn't resolve inside them. You didn't leave in a way they could process. You didn't react in a way that gave them control. You didn't explain enough for them to feel settled, and now their mind keeps returning to you, not out of attachment, but out of interruption, because something about you broke the pattern they were used to. And once a pattern breaks without closure, the mind doesn't move on easily. That's why you stayed. 1. You didn't follow a predictable ending. Most interactions come to a close through a sequence the mind already understands. There is usually a build-up, a reaction, some form of emotional exchange, and then a clear point where everything settles into a recognizable ending. Even when things are not resolved in a healthy way, the structure itself gives the mind something to work with. It can label the situation, assign meaning, and move forward without needing to revisit it again and again. What happened to you did not follow that structure. There was no clear sequence that led to a defined conclusion. No reaction that confirmed what they expected. No emotional exchange that allowed them to understand where you stood. The usual signals that help someone process an ending were missing. And without those signals, the interaction could not be organized into something complete. You did not respond in a way that continued the familiar pattern. You did not argue to create clarity. You did not explain yourself to make things easier to understand. You did not react in a way that allowed them to place you into a known category. Instead, the interaction reached a point where it simply stopped progressing in the way they were used to. And that interruption changed how the entire experience was stored in their mind. The mind depends on patterns to create closure. It expects certain steps to happen because those steps provide a clear path from beginning to end. When those steps are missing, the process remains open. It does not know where to stop, so it keeps returning to the same moment, trying to find a version of the ending that makes sense. There was no predictable ending to return to. The interaction did not give them enough to define what happened or why it ended the way it did. They cannot clearly say whether you pulled away, lost interest, stayed unaffected, or simply chose not to engage. Every possibility remains open, and that lack of definition keeps the experience active in their mind. This is what makes it difficult for them to move on from it in a normal way. It is not about attachment or emotional dependency. It is about the absence of a completed pattern. The mind does not easily release what it cannot organize, and without a clear structure, it continues to revisit the same point, searching for something that was never fully expressed. From your side, there is nothing unfinished. You did not feel the need to continue, explain, or complete the interaction in a way that would satisfy their expectations. Your internal shift was enough for you to move forward without looking back. But from their side, the experience did not reach a point that feels settled, and that difference in perception is what keeps you present in their thoughts. They may replay the last moments, trying to understand what changed. They may look for signs that were not obvious at the time. They may try to interpret your silence, your calmness, or your lack of reaction as something that holds meaning, but the reality is simpler than that. The sequence they were used to never completed itself, and without completion the mind continues to search. This is why your absence does not feel like a clear ending to them. It feels like something paused in the middle, something that stopped before it reached a conclusion they could understand. And when something feels paused rather than finished, it does not fade in the same way. It remains present, not because it is still active, but because it was never fully processed. You did not leave in a way that followed their expectations. You did not close the loop in a way that allowed their mind to rest. You stepped out of the pattern before it reached its usual ending. And once that happened, the experience could no longer be placed into something familiar, and when something cannot be placed, it continues to return. 2. You became mentally disruptive. There is a certain comfort the mind depends on when interacting with others. It prefers patterns that are easy to follow, reactions that can be anticipated, and behaviors that fit into familiar categories. When someone behaves in a consistent way, the mind begins to organize them quickly. It understands how to respond, what to expect, and how to maintain control within the interaction. This predictability creates stability, even if the connection itself is not perfect. With you, that stability no longer exists. Something about the way you responded, or chose not to respond, interrupted the mental structure they were using to understand you. You didn't act in a way that matched your previous patterns, and you didn't replace those patterns with something equally predictable. Instead, your behavior created a gap between what they expected and what actually happened, and that gap is where the disruption began. You were not emotional in the way they could process. You were not reactive in a way that gave them direction. You did not provide signals that allowed them to adjust their behavior and regain a sense of control. And because of that, their usual way of understanding you stopped working. The mental shortcuts they relied on no longer applied, and suddenly, something that once felt easy to navigate became difficult to interpret. This is what makes your presence disruptive, even in your absence. The mind tries to reduce people into clear categories because it simplifies interaction. It wants to know whether someone is attached, distant, predictable, or responsive. Once it assigns that category, it builds expectations around it. But when someone does not fit cleanly into any of those categories, the mind struggles to settle. It keeps revisiting the interaction, trying to find a label that makes sense, but nothing fully matches. You didn't give them a version of you that could be easily defined. One moment you were present, the next moment you were not reacting in the same way. One situation may have suggested closeness, while another showed complete detachment. These shifts were not inconsistent from your side. They were simply aligned with your internal state. But from their perspective, it created a pattern they could not map. And when the mind cannot map something, it stays active. It replays conversations, examines details, and tries to reconstruct meaning from moments that no longer follow a clear sequence. It searches for hidden explanations, looking for something it may have missed, something that would restore its ability to understand what happened. But because your behavior did not come from a predictable pattern, there is no simple explanation to find. This is why your absence does not feel neutral to them. It carries a kind of tension, not because you are doing anything, but because their mind is still trying to resolve the disruption you created. You did not leave behind a stable impression. You left behind an interruption in their normal way of thinking, and interruptions are difficult to ignore. The mind is designed to complete what feels incomplete, and to understand what feels unclear. When something disrupts its usual process, it keeps returning to it until it can make sense of it. But in your case, the disruption does not lead to a clear conclusion, and that is what keeps the cycle active. You didn't try to stand out. You didn't attempt to create confusion. You simply stopped operating within the limits of how they expected you to behave, and by doing that, you removed the structure they depended on to understand you. Now, instead of moving on naturally, their mind stays engaged, not with you as a person, but with the unresolved impression you left behind. Because once something becomes mentally disruptive, it does not fade quietly. 3. You removed their emotional leverage. In many interactions, influence is not obvious. It doesn't always show up as control or pressure. It appears in small, repeated moments where someone learns how your emotions respond and begins to rely on that response. Over time, this creates a kind of leverage, not because it is planned, but because your reactions become part of how the connection operates. They learn what affects you, what draws you in, what keeps you engaged, and once that understanding is in place, it becomes easier for them to guide the direction of the interaction. Before, your emotional responses were accessible. If something shifted in tone, you would feel it. If something was said in a certain way, you would react to it, your attention would move, your energy would adjust, and without realizing it, your responses became part of a system they could depend on. This didn't make you weak, it made you responsive. But responsiveness, when it becomes predictable, creates a pathway that others can use. That pathway is what changed. You did not stop feeling. You did not become disconnected or indifferent. What changed was your relationship with your own reactions. Instead of responding immediately, there is now a pause. Instead of absorbing what is directed at you, there is awareness. And in that awareness, your response is no longer automatic. It is chosen. This shift removes something they were relying on. When your reactions are no longer predictable, they cannot guide the interaction the same way. The tone they once used to get a response no longer works. The emotional signals they once relied on no longer move you in the same direction. What used to create engagement now meets stillness, and that stillness changes the entire dynamic. They may try to recreate the same conditions, using the same approach that worked before, expecting the same outcome, but the response is different now. There is no immediate reaction to build on, no emotional shift they can use to continue the pattern, and without that, the interaction loses its momentum. This is where the sense of control disappears, not because you took anything away from them directly, but because the mechanism that allowed influence is no longer active. Emotional leverage only exists when someone can predict how you will respond and use that response to shape the interaction. Once your responses are no longer predictable or easily triggered, that leverage no longer holds. This creates confusion. They may feel like something has changed without understanding what it is. The same words do not have the same effect. The same situations do not produce the same reactions, and without that familiar feedback, they are left without a clear way to continue the dynamic they were used to. For you, the shift is internal. You are still aware of everything that is happening. You still understand the tone, the context, the underlying meaning, but you are no longer pulled into it in the same way. Your state remains steady, and that steadiness cannot be easily influenced from the outside. This is what makes the change permanent, because it is not based on effort or resistance. It is based on a different level of awareness. You are no longer reacting out of habit. You are no longer participating in emotional exchanges that rely on predictable responses, and once that pattern is gone, it cannot be restored in the same form. They are not dealing with a new version of your old behavior. They are dealing with the absence of a system they once understood, and without that system, the connection cannot function the way it used to. 4. Your absence created pressure, not relief. In most situations, when someone is no longer present, the effect is simple. The mind begins to settle. Without new interaction, without new input, the emotional intensity slowly reduces, and over time the person becomes less active in thought. This is what usually creates relief. Distance allows the mind to quiet down and move forward without needing to revisit what has already passed. That is not what happened here. Your absence did not create space that felt calm. It created space that felt active. Instead of reducing the intensity, it shifted it into a different form. There is no conversation, no visible interaction, yet the presence of what you left behind continues to move in the background, and that movement creates pressure. This happens because your absence did not follow a complete ending. There was no clear resolution, no final emotional exchange that allowed the situation to settle. Without that, the mind does not treat your absence as something finished. It treats it as something still open, something that has not reached a stable conclusion. When something feels open, the mind does not relax around it. It keeps returning to it, not in a loud or obvious way, but in quiet moments, in small thoughts that appear without effort. It tries to make sense of the gap between what was expected and what actually happened, and because there is no clear answer, that gap remains active. This is what creates pressure instead of relief. The absence of closure means there is no clear point where the mind can stop. There is no defined ending to place the experience behind. Instead, there is a continuous sense that something is unfinished, even if nothing is actually happening anymore, and that sense of something unfinished keeps the mind engaged. Your absence also removed the ability to resolve things through interaction. If you were still present in the same way, there would be opportunities to clarify, to react, to complete the exchange in a way that feels final. But because you are not participating in that process, there is no way for them to reach a conclusion through you. The only place the process can continue is inside their own mind, and that internal process does not settle easily. It moves in cycles, returning to the same points, trying to understand what changed, what was missed, and why the ending did not follow a familiar path. It looks for meaning in what was said, and even more in what was not said. It tries to reconstruct the interaction into something that makes sense. But without new input, it cannot fully resolve itself. This is why your absence feels different. It is not empty. It is filled with questions that were never answered, with patterns that were never completed, and with a version of you that cannot be clearly defined. And because of that, the space you left behind does not fade quietly. It holds tension. From your side, nothing is active. There is no need to revisit, no need to continue, no need to explain. The shift is already complete. But from their side, the absence does not feel like something that has ended. It feels like something that stopped before it reached a point of understanding. And when something stops without understanding, it does not create relief. It creates a quiet, ongoing pressure that keeps returning, not because it wants to hold on, but because it has not found a way to let go. 5. You became difficult to categorize. The mind works by organizing people into clear categories. It looks for patterns in behavior, tone, and response, then places someone into a defined role. This makes interaction easier. Once a person is understood in a certain way, expectations become stable. The mind knows how to respond, what to expect next, and how to maintain a sense of control within the connection. Before, you could be placed into one of those categories. Your behavior, your reactions, and your emotional responses followed a structure that could be understood. Even if the connection had its complexities, there was still enough consistency for them to define you in a way that made sense. They could say, "This is how you react. This is how you respond. This is what you feel." And once that definition was formed, it became the framework they used to interact with you. That framework no longer holds. Something in your behavior no longer fits into the categories they are used to relying on. You are not reacting in a way that confirms their previous understanding, but you are also not acting in a way that creates a new, clear definition. Instead, your presence exists in a space that does not fully match any label they can apply. At one moment you may appear calm and unaffected. In another you are engaged but not emotionally invested in the way they expect. You do not respond with intensity, but you are not distant in a way that feels disconnected. These shifts are not inconsistent from your side. They are aligned with your internal state, but from their perspective, they do not form a pattern that can be easily mapped. This is what creates the difficulty. The mind searches for clarity through labels. It wants to define someone so it can simplify the interaction. But when a person does not fit into a clear category, the mind cannot settle. It keeps trying to assign a label that feels accurate, but each attempt falls short, because your behavior does not stay within the limits of any single definition. You are not fully available, but you are not completely absent. You are not reactive, but you are not indifferent. You are present, but not in a way that gives predictable access. Each of these qualities overlaps, but none of them fully define you anymore. This creates a kind of cognitive tension. They cannot say you are one thing or another with certainty. They cannot rely on a fixed understanding of how you think or how you will respond. And without that certainty, their usual way of interacting with you loses its foundation. From your side, this shift is natural. You are no longer operating from a fixed pattern that needs to be consistent for others to understand. Your responses are not based on maintaining a certain image or fitting into a role. They come from a more stable internal position that does not depend on being easily defined. But from their side, this lack of definition keeps you active in their mind, because when someone can be clearly categorized, the mind can place them into a known structure and move forward. But when someone exists outside of those categories, the process remains open. The mind continues to observe, analyze, and revisit, trying to find a way to understand something that does not follow its usual rules. This is why you remain present without effort, not because you are doing anything to stay in their thoughts, but because you no longer fit into the framework they rely on to make sense of people. And when the mind cannot categorize something, it does not release it easily. It keeps returning to it, trying to define what cannot be easily defined. 6. You exist without presence. Most people remain in someone's thoughts because there is ongoing interaction. Messages, conversations, shared spaces, or recent memories keep the connection active. The mind has something current to hold on to, so the presence feels natural and easy to explain. When that interaction stops, the presence usually fades with it, because there is no new input to sustain it. With you, that usual pattern does not apply. There is no active conversation, no recent exchange, no visible connection that would explain why you continue to appear in their thoughts. Yet you do, not constantly, not in a way that feels obvious, but in moments that arrive without effort, a quiet reminder, a passing thought, a sudden return of something they thought had already settled. This is what it means to exist without presence. You are not maintaining your position through action. You are not reinforcing it through communication. There is nothing you are doing to stay relevant in their mind. And because of that, your presence cannot be explained through the usual reasons. It exists without support, without repetition, without anything external keeping it alive. What keeps you there is not interaction. It is the imprint you left behind. That imprint was not formed through intensity or frequency alone. It was formed through interruption. Something about you did not follow the patterns their mind relies on. Something about the way you responded or chose not to respond created a break in how they process connections, and that break did not close. When a pattern completes, the mind stores it and moves on. When a pattern is interrupted without resolution, the mind keeps returning to it, not because it wants to hold on, but because it has not finished processing what happened. And in that unfinished process, you remain present. You are not being remembered in a traditional sense. There is no deliberate attempt to think about you, no conscious effort to revisit the connection. Instead, your presence appears in the background of their thoughts, triggered by moments that resemble something familiar but do not fully match. A tone, a situation, a small detail can bring you back, not as a clear memory but as something that still feels unresolved. This is why your absence does not erase your presence. You are not tied to current interaction. You are tied to something that did not fully settle. And because it did not settle, it continues to exist in a space that does not depend on time or distance. It does not fade in the same way, because it was never fully processed in the first place. From your side, there is nothing active. You are not holding on to the connection. You are not revisiting it. Your state has already moved forward, and there is no need to maintain anything related to it. But from their side, the process is incomplete, and as long as it remains incomplete, your presence does not require your participation. It sustains itself. This is what makes it different from a normal memory. A normal memory fades as new experiences replace it. But something that feels unfinished does not fade the same way. It stays available, ready to return at any moment, not because it is being kept alive intentionally, but because it never reached a point where it could fully close. You exist in that space, not through visibility, not through effort, not through continued connection, but through the absence of a conclusion that their mind could accept. And because of that, you remain present without needing to be there. You exist without presence. It's not something you tried to create. And that's exactly why it works. You didn't hold on. You didn't chase. You didn't force your presence to be remembered. You simply shifted. And that shift changed how people experience you. Now there's a gap where clarity used to be. A space where they expected something familiar, but found something different instead. And that difference doesn't fade easily, because the mind doesn't hold on to what is obvious. It holds on to what it couldn't fully process. So don't question it. Don't try to explain it, because this was never about staying connected. It was about becoming someone who no longer fits into the same place. And once that happens, you don't need to be present to be remembered.